We begin with a story that everybody's claiming an exclusive today, but we genuinely did break it at 12 noon yesterday on this programme as a consequence of my colleague Lewis Goodall's efforts. But, you know, it doesn't really matter in the great scheme of things. What matters is what happened. And it was a blunder undertaken by somebody working for the British military that triggered an epic government super-injunction. The figure of £7 billion is probably much higher than what the final figure will be, but that's the amount of money that has been set aside to accommodate the 24,000 people and their dependents identified in a data breach that could have constituted a Taliban kill list. It's hard to know which element of the story has become more important in the 22 hours that have elapsed since we first started talking about it on this programme. I suspect, as the dust settles and as historians of the future begin to chronicle this extraordinary episode, the claim by Taliban spokespeople that they had the leaked list of Afghans all along may turn out to be rather pertinent. 25,000 Afghans who were applying for asylum, soldiers who had worked with the British Army. Let me say that again, soldiers who had worked with the British Army and their family members. The Taliban claims that it had this list in 2022 and has been hunting down those named ever since. A second Taliban official telling the Telegraph that the hunt for individuals named in the document had intensified in recent months, with names handed over to border forces to stop them from leaving the country. Many only discovered they were on the list when they actually tried to cross the Taliban-controlled borders. It's a hideous, hideous story in every way, every imaginable way. But you know who really we should be focusing on today is the people who have been betrayed by this breach. Not consciously, necessarily, but we don't know. There's so much here that we don't know. There's so much that we don't know. I'm in danger of turning into Donald Rumsfeld and starting to distinguish between known knowns, known unknowns, unknown knowns, and all the rest of it. But we don't know what happened. And I don't think it would be appropriate to conduct a phone-in on that element of what we don't know. I do currently think it might be appropriate to conduct a phone-in on another element of what we don't know, which is why they really covered it up, because I don't believe the explanation that's been given. It doesn't justify the years that passed, effectively. I can understand why the current government didn't undo it immediately, because they had little choice but to believe the position that had been put in place by the previous government, and examining that properly. Probably, and again, I'm open to correction on this from people who know more than I do, but I don't know who would be in that category, given the secretive nature of everything. You'd need to conduct a proper inquiry. You'd need to have a proper review. You couldn't just leave it up to a court when government lawyers have argued a position very, very, very strongly, and a court has agreed with that position. I don't know that another government can just come in and strike a red line through what had previously been decided. But I don't know. And you know, it's unfortunate in many ways that the government changed, and many people will find their position changes as a consequence. And maybe I'm guilty of that myself. I don't think so. But I don't know what else you can do but stick with the original ruling until you've been given pertinent reasons to get rid of it. They probably could have moved quicker. Shall we leave it at that? 8 minutes after 10 is the time. But the biggest thing we don't know is what happened. So I will allow myself a moment of speculation, because it is usually the case that Occam's razor kicks in at times like this, and the simplest explanation is usually the one that turns out to be the truth. Or you can marry Occam's razor to a little bit of Sherlock Holmes, and once you have eliminated the impossible, whatever you are left with, however improbable, must be the truth. But we don't know what is impossible here. If it was deliberately done by an individual member of the military for reasons, I can hear all sorts of theories percolating through the minds of people who may be better informed or closer to the military establishment than I am. Might there be people on this list that know things that might be embarrassing to members of the British military? We were there for 20 years. These are largely, mostly men that fought alongside us. Or does Occam's razor take you where it currently takes me, which is to the conclusion that it was human error? We've all been there. I mean, it is extraordinary that such sensitive information could be on the internet at all, really, not on some sort of encrypted site. And they were using Excel spreadsheets. I read inappropriately. They should have been using specifically built software. But we've all had experiences of specifically, well, not all of us, but you know that specifically built software doesn't always do the job as well as the much more popular and generic stuff. So somebody sitting in an office somewhere, and the longer you do a job, the more inured you become to its sensitivity and unique status. Most obviously, I suppose, emergency services, stuff that would have the rest of us absolutely reeling and retching in horror. Is now the daily experience of people working in the emergency services. And the longer you do it for, the more inured you become to the unique status of what it is that you're doing. And the same is true of almost everything else. So if you're dealing with this sort of sensitive data every day, then you will be your consciousness of how sensitive it is will diminish, and so you will not be as careful as you should be. And that, of course, means that it is either a decision to leak it or an accidental keystroke, an accidental button being pressed. But again, I don't know that matters much yet. I think the government should tell us. I think the government should tell us what happened with as much detail as they reasonably can within the parameters of secrecy. But given that they've ridden roughshod over the trust that those parameters of secrecy demand, it puts them in a very difficult situation. Jack puts it best: never assign to malice what can be explained through incompetence. Never assign to malice what can be explained through incompetence. Ben Wallace making no apology for the Afghan injunction. That's the nature of politicians in general, not all of them, but generally speaking. Never explain, never apologise. Certainly anybody who was adjacent to Boris Johnson's various political moments would subscribe to the never explain, never apologise school of thought. It's a case for arguing that the current government explains and apologises too much. But that's not the conversation we're having today. The conversation we're having today is why you think they did it. Why you think they did it. Why they did it for so long. And I've got a theory that I invite you to examine. I think they did it because of the way the narrative on immigration in general has been permitted to develop in this country. In fact, even that's a euphemism. It hasn't just been permitted to develop. People have seized with glee the increasingly rabid demonisation of refugees and asylum seekers, because there would be no more worthy applicant than somebody who fought alongside British soldiers against the Taliban. Am I suffering from a surfeit of naivety and patriotic compassion when I suggest to you that even 2 years ago, even 3 years ago, certainly 5 years ago, and most definitely a decade ago, there wouldn't be a debate here. There wouldn't be room for words like smuggle and migrant in this story. It would be a tale about the duty of care we have to men who risk their lives to help us fight against the murderous extremists of the Taliban. It would have been simple. And now I'm reading that the government's worried that there might be more riots, more Farage-flavoured riots in the summer if the anger about the fact that we've brought these people here secretly is allowed to ferment. And unfortunately, I can understand why they are making that point. But the question of why they covered it up in the first place, for me, at the moment, leads back to the same place. I think they sat around, I don't know who was sat around the table, but when you have eliminated the impossible, whatever you are left with, however improbable, must be the truth. We know that the list was in the public space. We know that the Taliban claim they've had it since 2022. I'm not suggesting anybody should trust the word of the Taliban, but their version of events seems to me to be feasible. The government, for the first 2 months of that injunction, may well have believed that it wasn't widespread enough, that it hadn't spread widely enough to make attempts to keep it secret pointless. But at the end of that 2 months, I think they must have realised. I think they must have realised. I think they covered it up because the Tories created a population that was so enraged, with the help of Nigel Farage and his mates, created a population that was so enraged by the existence of any refugee, any asylum seeker. I think they covered it up because they didn't want to be the people that had to tell the public we were going to look after 24,000 people who had potentially risked their lives to look after our boys in Afghanistan. And I don't normally use language like that. Our boys. I think sometimes when we over-sentimentalise military matters, we do a disservice to the military. So we somehow denude them of humanity and instead turn them into sort of icons or fetishised figures. But it works for me today. 24,000 Afghans looking after our boys in Afghanistan should have a red carpet rolled out for them, shouldn't they? Shouldn't they? Mike disagrees. He's been in touch to say, who cares about the rights of terrorists? Not me. So something in the phrase, soldiers who fought alongside the British military against the Taliban, has Mike thinking terrorists. And that's exactly what I'm talking about. Mike wasn't born that stupid. He's been created by the rhetoric of many, many Tories and people like Nigel Farage. All asylum seekers are dodgy. They're all criminals. They're all terrorists. And Mike believes it. So how can the Tory party turn around a couple of years ago and say we're bringing 24,000 people to this country, the same people that we've been bleating and whining and moaning and complaining about since we shut down the safe and legal routes for people from the Middle East to come to this country? Extraordinary and shameful. And Brexit Britain. It's who we are. So what do you reckon? Have you got a better reason? Why do you think they covered it up? 0345 6060 973. If not because Rishi Sunak didn't want to be the Prime Minister and Ben Wallace didn't want to be the Defence Secretary and Grant Shapps was there for a couple of weeks. They didn't want to be the people to say, we've got 24,000 Afghans that we've put into potential danger and we're going to bring them all here. Because the atmosphere surrounding small boats, but more pertinently refuge. Remember, we live in a country where a woman who encouraged an actual pogrom against these people, against men who may even have been part of this evacuation process, has somehow become a cause célèbre among the right-wing media. Imagine somebody, if Twitter had existed in 1930s Germany, somebody tweeted "burn the Jews," and Daily Telegraph columnists queued up to defend her and claim that she'd been a victim of two-tier justice or a victim of some sort of miscarriage. Not only that, but she was identifying the buildings in which the Jews could be found and encouraging people to set fire to them as mobs rampaged through the streets of our towns. And she's become a cause célèbre. And against that backdrop, just a year previously, you reckon this government, the last government, would have come out and said, everybody calm down, we found 24,000, they're not dodgy, they're not the ones we've demonised, they're not the ones you need to be worried about, they're not the ones that Mike thinks are terrorists, and they're not the ones that someone will pop up tomorrow to tell you we're all sex offenders. They're real people who fought alongside or helped British military during a 20-year campaign in a country we should probably never have gone near. And now we have to protect them from the people we failed to defeat. So, why do you think they covered it up? 0345 6060 973. And why wouldn't we roll out a red carpet for these people? What's changed in this country on your watch that has turned us into a population that would not welcome these people, that even today is being warned about potential riots because we may have to house people that helped our soldiers fight against the Taliban? Why wouldn't we roll out a red carpet? Why wouldn't we look after them? Why wouldn't we do our most basic and simple duty? The kind of men that talk about Judeo-Christian values will not be talking about Judeo-Christian values today because they know what a Judeo-Christian value, or to be fair, an Abrahamic religion would teach about helping people in this sort of situation. So what's changed? 0345 6060 973. Question number one, why do you think they covered it up? Tell me I'm wrong. Or indeed tell me I'm right. And question number two, why on earth has the narrative, the discourse surrounding this story already lurched into language like smuggling and migrants, when in fact it's allies and duty that we should be talking about? What's happened to us that allows this story to be turned into the toxic poison I'm reading in most of my newspapers today, and which is leading government ministers to probably rightly conclude that it could lead to more riots. Doing right by people who did their duty by us could lead to riots on the street of this country.